Hi, and welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. We're at ServerlessConf Austin for a day of podcasting, talking about serverless technologies, those who are using these emerging technologies, and the practitioners and vendors who are helping users to onboard and adopt serverless methodologies. Hi, I'm Benjamin Ball from the New Stack. I'm joined today by Jason McGee, VP and CTO of the IBM Cloud Platform. Thanks for joining me today, Jason.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, we're at Serverless Conference Austin and getting towards the end of the day for the first day, and pretty interesting conversation so far. And frankly, I'm excited to hear about some of the announcements you guys have to share around IBM Bluemix OpenWhisk.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start off our conversation with a little bit about frankly, what Bluemix OpenWhisk is, and also what your announcements are around it.
Sure. So, for those who don't know, Bluemix is our public cloud platform. Kind of a fully featured cloud that has everything from infrastructure through to containers and serverless, of course, and higher level capabilities like cognitive and IoT and video and. Really kind of broad platform for developers to build applications. Bluemix OpenWhisk is our serverless capability that's part of our cloud. It's based on Apache OpenWhisk, which is open technology that we originally developed and brought into the open source community to provide serverless capabilities. One of the things that's interesting about Bluemix is that it's all built on open technologies, and the serverless space, which we're talking about here this week, is a pretty young space and an area where there wasn't, frankly, a lot of open technology. There was a lot of cloud provider-specific solutions, and so when we took on the challenge a couple years ago to build serverless into our cloud, we built Whisk and we open sourced it, and that's the basis for Bluemix.
That's interesting. Listeners for us will be pretty familiar with Bluemix. We talked a lot with IBM and even with you in the past about Bluemix. OpenWhisk is, I think, a new focus for us, part of our focus on serverless in general. Can you maybe speak a little bit about the specific advantage of Bluemix OpenWhisk and kind of how that fully realizes the capabilities of OpenWhisk?
Sure. So I think we're all blessed that we have a technology space here that's just moving incredibly fast, and serverless is a good example of that. Bluemix OpenWhisk showed up in our platform kind of in beta about a year ago in fully GA kind of capability at the end of the year. We think there's a number of advantages to what we're doing with OpenWhisk. One is certainly the kind of open dimension. As a developer, I think what a lot of developers want, certainly what a lot of organizations want, is kind of freedom of movement of the applications that they create. And so as this kind of new architecture of serverless is evolving, we think it's really important that evolves on a base that is open and allows them to move those workloads to other clouds or to on-prem or to other environments. So we think that's a real advantage of the approach that we're taking. Of course, OpenWhisk on Bluemix is well integrated with the rest of our platform. So it's really easy with OpenWhisk to take advantage of Watson, to take advantage of our IoT frameworks, to build mixed applications that use containers and serverless together to build a solution, to really compose applications made up of whatever the right blend of technologies are that are needed to solve that problem. This week we're announcing some new stuff in OpenWhisk that kind of goes along that train. For example, we're announcing integration between OpenWhisk and our API gateway capabilities. So if you want to build an API out of a serverless function, you can do that very easily without having to kind of worry about how do I run gateways and web servers and how do I configure all that, and get the advantage of rate limiting and security and API key management and analytics on who's using your APIs. Like all of that stuff can come easily because we can take something like Whisk, connect it to something else in our cloud like API Gateway, and make that available to a developer.
Great. So the API Gateway makes a lot of sense. APIs are obviously something we're all focusing on.
Yeah.
And the New Stack, we particular proponents, I guess, of the I hate to use the phrase, but API economy and
Sure.
really the value of consuming and surfacing APIs. So it makes a lot of sense. Is any other announcements around
Yeah, I mean, there's other capabilities, certainly. I mean, Whisk is something that's been evolving pretty rapidly within our platform. New developer capabilities, new partnerships with people like PubNub to get more data into the platform. It's funny, the conference is called Serverless. A lot of people like to focus on the serverless aspect. But to me, a lot of times, the more interesting thing is the event-oriented aspect.
Yes.
Right. And the simplicity with which you can build some really powerful applications by taking an event-oriented approach. And I think that's especially powerful in cloud, where the cloud provides a lot of the events that you would want to do interesting things on, like, I updated an image in object storage, and whenever that image gets updated in object storage, I want to do some processing. I want to send it to Watson and do image classification and figure out what's in that image. That's super easy to do when you combine kind of the capabilities of AI in a cloud with the events that you get out of infrastructure services like object storage and a programming model like serverless. You can build those apps super easy, they scale. So to me, that kind of event dimension and the integration in cloud is what's actually really compelling about serverless, and that's where we focused in the work we're doing in Whisk.
The integration with cloud and the event-driven architectures, that's something I've really kind of only stumbled upon recently, or really seen that as something people are driving home.
Right.
Even at Serverless Conference, there's been, on the workshop day, there was an event-driven security focus. A number of companies that I'm sure we're going to talk to later and also hear from later are talking about event-driven monitoring and
Yep.
observability. So clearly you're onto something here, because it's something I think we're going to continue to hear about.
Yeah.
Is that event-driven architecture just something that IBM is really pushing and really obviously already taking advantage of? Is it just something you think will be a greater part of the focus around serverless?
No, I think that the core idea is present in all the serverless systems. I mean, I don't like to talk about naming because it's just such a messed up topic, but for whatever reason, the community has kind of gravitated towards serverless as the moniker. But if you look at most serverless systems, they have both the kind of serverless execution dimension and they have this kind of event dimension. And one of the things that I think, if you look at like the interesting use cases around serverless, they almost always have that kind of strong strong event-oriented nature to them. As an engineer, the first thing we always figure out is, how do I build a web app out of whatever new technology there is? But there's lots of ways to build web apps. That's not that interesting at the end of the day. But like doing IoT sensor processing, or doing image classification, or today we heard from a speaker here who talked about doing video transcoding. Right? Those are great scenarios for serverless because they're fundamentally kind of a trigger-based workflow. Like a new video shows up, and when a new video shows up, I want to transcode it into these 3 formats and apply this classification to it. That's really easy to write in a serverless programming model, and then the execution model makes it easy to scale that and to keep it highly available. Those are the interesting ones, and we have some great customer scenarios where they're doing things like that.
So the investment in serverless, I can't help but draw some parallels to, I guess, the investment in the container ecosystem. Yeah. We've talked with you a lot in the past about the container ecosystem, especially even the open parts of the container ecosystem and the focus on open source projects and capabilities. Is this something where it is a similar need to invest in these communities and the open source projects, and that's part of the reason why we see IBM so present here? And it seems interesting to me because it seems like it fits really well with the overall Bluemix story already. Yeah,
I think we believe that this is, and if anytime you're building a cloud platform and you're thinking about how developers build apps, you're really trying to predict kind of what are the models that developers are going to follow for their application architectures for the next 5 or 10 years. Right? And as we look at the space, we say, look, we all agree on APIs. You mentioned that earlier. From how we organize ourselves, we're all trying to move to things like microservices, which to me is fundamentally about people and how teams organize and how you divide up work, right? And then the question becomes, well, how are you going to run all of that application logic? And I think going forward, there's going to be 2 dominant models. Containers as the kind of general purpose execution model for kind of whole wide variety of application styles. And then serverless for the kind of event-oriented scenarios where that model is just the better model for implementing code. And I think most apps will be some blend of those 2 technologies. And I think that's actually an area where the community hasn't had a lot of discussion yet about how to blend those things in a reasonable way. Sometimes it feels like containers and serverless are like at odds with each other.
Yeah, it's actually a great point.
But I don't think they really are, you know?
Yeah, I'm curious to explore that a little bit more, because obviously our bread and butter is talking about containers. So
Right.
we want to know where there is overlap. Is there room for these to exist? We had someone talk earlier about enterprises that were skipping containers and going straight to serverless,
Sure.
and not even really considering if they need containers at all. And frankly, I can see where that works for some people. But if there is a story about using these in parallel and how you can actually take advantage of both approaches, it's something that we're interested in.
Right, and I think, like I said, I think it's a newer conversation. Maybe it shouldn't be as new, but I think it's something that's emerging. I think if you focus on kind of the strengths of the technologies, like on the serverless side, if you were more focused on event-oriented as the aspect that drives you towards that side of the equation, I think it becomes a lot clearer to look at a problem and say, which technology to use. I mean, I'll give you an example. We have a customer that we're working with, which is a large bank, pretty kind of classical enterprise organization. Like many enterprises, they have some very forward-thinking teams within those organizations. One of the problems they were trying to solve was optical check processing. Like their mobile app lets you take a picture of your check and deposit that check. And if you think what happens, of course, behind the scenes is you get an image of the check, you do some image processing on it, you do some OCR on it, you extract all the data, you deposit the check, you archive it. That's very trigger or event oriented, like whenever a new check shows up, I do these 7 things. And it's also a very kind of spiky workload. Like Fridays are really busy because everyone gets their check on Friday and everyone wants to deposit their check and get their money so they can go out to the bar or whatever on Friday night. And so if you looked at their load profile, incredible load on Fridays, much lower load the rest of the week. Great use case for serverless, right? In fact, they're building their application now. Their mobile check processing function uses OpenWhisk on Bluemix on the back end to do all that processing. So in that case, like you look at that problem and you go, serverless is a good answer, right? There's other parts of the problem, the core web banking interface, like the web interface for that system. Some of the more complex business process aspects of their things. Containers are a more flexible base. They allow them to do some performance optimization and to do caching and to really control the software stack in a deeper way. And so their overall banking solution is some blend of these two things. And I think that's where the conversation has to start going. We're still in the early stages, right? Where it's like, this technology is cool, we can solve everything with this. But that'll mature, I think, over time.
Is there any kind of maybe early pain points that we're going to have to tackle in the near future, I guess? As something as, I think I'm pretty much asking everyone, are there things that really need to clarify soon that are a problem right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hear some of it being talked about this week at the conference. Debugging is challenging in a serverless model. What's the DevOps pipeline look like for serverless applications? And how do I package up applications and get them deployed into production when it's more than the simplistic kind of single function scenarios, right? I think one of the big ones is going to be when you have more complex event flows, like this event gets processed by a function which triggers other events that get processed by other functions. You get this kind of network of events. Understanding what's going on in a world like that is challenging, right? I mean, I think back to doing UI programming, 15 years ago, if you're building, Mac or Windows UI programs, like those are event-oriented systems fundamentally. And you could get some really weird, complex interactions because you have all these events kind of cascading off of each other, and it's really hard for a human to figure out what's going on in that system. And so I think there's a need for monitoring and visualization tools, DevOps tools, and other things in the near term to really help the average developer adopt these technologies.
Yeah, I think as you said, we've already heard at this conference people talking about the monitoring and debugging and kind of things in the observability stack, I guess. And so that's interesting. I'm glad to hear that validated. I think something we'll be talking about more in the future.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jason.
Sure.
I think it's been a great conversation. I'm really interested to see the future for OpenWhisk and for the serverless community at large.
Yeah, we are too.
Thanks for joining us. That's
great.
Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcasts. Also, please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.